Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Speaker Stories. We've taken a long summer break, but we're back. We're getting ready to go back to in-person meetings, and we're going to be starting this month, September 27th, at the Rock Bottom. That's a Tuesday. We'll start at noon. We're joined by our speaker who will be speaking on the 27th. It's Patrick Sullivan. Patrick is a second-year PhD student in the Department of Geology at the Colorado School of Mines, where he also received his master's in 2021. He's currently working with Dr. Steven Sonnenberg in the Mud Rocks and Tight Oil Characterization Research Consortium. And his work focuses on the regional sedimentology, geochronology, and the petroleum geology of the Turonian Wall Creek-Turner system in the Powder River Basin of Wyoming. Patrick, welcome to Speaker Stories. Thanks for being here. How are you doing today?
Thanks so much for having me. I'm doing great. It's
awesome.
It's great to be here.
Awesome. Well, let's just get into it. So where did you grow up? Where are you from, Patrick?
Yeah, so I'm originally from just north of St. Paul, Minnesota, and sort of born and raised, spending time in St. Paul, Minneapolis, but also I spent a lot of time in Switzerland because half my family on my mom's side is Swiss. And so definitely spent a lot of time around the mountains despite being from Minnesota in my childhood. And but yeah, that's where I grew up.
Okay, and then did hanging out in the mountains of Switzerland, did that influence your decision to move into geology, or how'd you get there?
I think unknowingly, probably. I mean, it wasn't like as a 3-year-old, I was like, oh, I want to be a geologist. So I grew up because I didn't even know that was a thing. Like I just liked rocks. I didn't realize that was like a career path. Great that it is. But no, I mean, I would come back with suitcases full of rocks. And I remember there was a few occasions where I even left stuff that I brought there so that I could bring back more rocks. And so now, of course, my parents have to deal with basements and garages full of rocks, which have become a rock garden of mine. But yeah, I think it wasn't really until undergrad that I realized it could become a career. Even through high school, I loved chemistry and biology and sort of thought a little bit about neuroscience and the interesting aspects of the brain and how much we don't know. And that's kind of what I've always gravitated towards, is fields of science where there's so much yet to discover. And I think that's why one of the things that pulled me in to geology was that just realizing how much we still don't know and the tools that we have to learn about it.
Yeah. And so where did you do your undergraduate? Did you, and the question I have after that is like, did you go in knowing that you wanted to be a geology student, or did it happen kind of as you were working through your prereqs and things?
Yeah, it happened after. It was kind of fortuitous, actually. So I didn't know I wanted to. I mean, I didn't even realize it was a science at first. I'd heard about it in high school, like earth sciences, like all the slackers who can't handle chemistry take earth science. That's why kind of what I thought about it. And then it was sort of a random drawing of the first year course, this thing that freshmen are placed into these random block courses that are a semester long. I didn't even sign up for it. And it was a historical geology course taught by Professor Ray Rogers. And I think day one, I realized that switch flipped where I realized it's something I'm not going to be able to unlearn, and I'm going to see this science everywhere around me. And so I think that's what happened is, I didn't know I wanted to do it until I think it was the first week. And every summer after that, Ray quickly became my advisor. He realized I wanted to do the research, and I realized that's what I wanted to do. And he was a vertebrate taphonomist, so sort of the intersection between geology and biology, this sort of interesting idea of how do fossils get preserved in the stratigraphic record and what can they tell us about these ancient environments. And that's sort of was the perfect thing to really get me into that science. And yeah, every summer after that at Macalester, I was spending months in Montana in the Missouri River breaks, just looking for these microfossil sort of vertebrate assemblages. And that became the subject of my honors thesis. But I mean, again, going into college, I had no idea this is what I wanted to do, but coming out, I was so sure of it. And, I still am. And I've seen how many aspects of the geosciences there are to sort of carve out a career path in. And, I started, like I mentioned, with these bone beds, and then I moved on to sort of, do I want to do paleontology? And I tried that in Switzerland for a semester, studied some fossil turtles, and then realized, well, maybe cladistics aren't really for me, too much math, I suppose. And then I think I sort of settled in realizing that um, that opportunity to really look into ancient depositional environments and their significance is what I really like to do.
Hmm. And do you still follow the paleontological side, or
Oh, for
is that
sure.
kind of a
Yeah, and I, especially through my connections at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, they have an incredibly strong vertebrate paleontology. Hard to call it a program, but it's basically, keeps up with a lot of like the D1 institutions that study it. They publish a ton on sort of
Mhm.
laramide, late Cretaceous age vertebrate assemblages. And I like to say that every paleontologist needs a good geologist with them, because without the larger understanding of, the rate of change of these environments and what actually the preservational potential of those environments are, those insights are so key, not just to writing the paper in the end, but also to actually discovering new vertebrate localities and understanding their, their place both in time and space.
Hmm.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, cool. And so what is your tie to the museum? What do you what do you do, or how did that come about? And tell
Yeah.
us what it is you do.
Sure. Yeah. And I actually started working there unrelated to geology, just as a postgraduate job. I graduated from McAllister in 2016 and just sort of moved to Colorado on a whim to follow my partner. And I applied for a job, just sort of, general pay to play lab coat scientist in one of their, it's called the Expedition Health Exhibit. And I got that job, and I was sort of just, working, dissecting sheep lungs and eyeballs and running a bunch of little experiments, just, wearing my lab coat all day. And then started actually volunteering up in the earth sciences division, prepping fossils and sort of, actually, I was not very good at prepping fossils. I was talking about fossils to the members of the public while, while on my time off. And I think quickly realized that I just love that science communication aspect of things. And the people up in the earth sciences department were happy to have someone that, knows how to talk about rocks and that greater context at a window. And I would sometimes talk to, 200-300 people a day on these free days. So and then eventually that evolved into internships, and I spent about a year and a half as an intern in various earth science related labs at the Museum of Nature and Science. And I realized that that's what I wanted to do as a career path. So I decided to go back to grad school and first get my master's and then now the PhD.
Oh wow, that's fantastic. I've heard it's kind of hard to get in there as a to get into the museum as a volunteer. Is that true?
Yeah, it definitely things have shifted around. Since COVID, there's been a lot of just like the rosters have changed a lot. But yeah, I mean, there's a line out the door waiting for people waiting to get in there, because it's a once you're in, it's a really cool opportunity to see some really unique fossils that are still, in the forefront of our scientific understanding of these ancient environments. And
Yeah.
um, there's that aspect of it. But there's also, it's a wonderful thing to do on a Tuesday, just spend time drilling into fossils with your hands. And that's the part I was never very good at, because I have very little patience for like that like I don't like puzzles, I guess. I just like jigsaw puzzles are not my thing. I like to like see my progress much faster. But yeah, I mean, I love the communication, and like I'm a big extrovert, so I love chatting with people all day, and I know not everyone can handle that either. So
Yeah,
we
yeah.
each have our place there. But yeah, to answer your question, it is challenging, but there's more opportunities than you'd expect, especially in different. There's like the prep side of things. There's the field. People, they always need volunteers for the field. So on their website, they have like a volunteer engagement page that you can go into details, and I think some days of the week might have openings.
Hmm. Oh, good to
Mhm.
know. Yeah, we live pretty close, and I take my kids there
Mhm.
all the time. So
Oh
yeah,
yeah,
we
it's
we love it.
amazing.
We love it.
Yeah. And I think I
Uh,
never quite lost that perspective of like, how cool is it to work here, right? Like, and I think a
yeah.
lot of people who work there have, because it's a nonprofit, they just, they're there for you know, just how cool it is, rather than the money necessarily. And it definitely pays off.
That's fantastic. And so you kind of mentioned you like to kind of be teaching at the museum. Is that something
Mhm.
that you want to do after your PhD, or any thoughts about where your career is going to take you along the way?
Yeah, and like, being the second year of a PhD, right now in the second year of my PhD, there's a lot of, I can see a lot of crossroads ahead of me, right? There's the teaching route. School of Mines, of course, has the more professional and engineering aspect. So a lot of folks here go into the more just hardline oil and gas research work. And I've, dabbled in all of that. I've done the academic side of things. I've done, published on fossil turtle for some reason, right? And I have also done the sort of applied, I guess, as it regard in regards to the energy industry, and I've seen what works and what doesn't work for me. And I think coming back to your question, the outreach needs to be a really key part of my future in whatever way that means. And the reason I continued on for a PhD is because it really gave me the opportunity to actually ask my own questions and do my own research here. So I will have the opportunity to actually sort of have some novel insights and spend a lot of time with a project and really push the boundaries of our understanding of this late Turonian system. But what I think is equally important is translating that to outreach efforts, to actually going to the public and telling, and sharing it, just not only with the geoscience community in the form of publications, but also to members of the public in the form of maps and open spaces and parklands, right? That new information has been gained. How do we actually translate to something where people can either take a glance at it for 5 seconds or actually read, an informational board about shifting, seaways of the late Cretaceous? Because that's ultimately how I got into geology, was with spending time outdoors and in places where the efforts of those who came before me were on display, and I'd like to continue that tradition.
So are you actively pursuing that portion of it? I mean, are you taking some of your research and putting it
Mhm.
out there for public access, like in
Yeah,
parks and things? Okay.
yeah, and so actually one of the projects I'm involved in, that's been going on since I was an intern at the museum 3 or 4 years ago, was we still kind of working on the name, but essentially it's a Rocky Mountain PALEOMAP project. So we're basically, me and James Hagedorn and some other folks from the Museum of Nature and Science are collectively sort of collaborating with a bunch of geoscientists who really specialize in different time periods of Earth's history, going back to, we're talking Proterozoic billion years ago, to basically the modern, and sort of building up these paleo maps, from the framework of, okay, data clarity, where have people actually walked on outcrops? We want to start with outcrop maps, and with, how do we know how old they are? So fossils and geochron, and we start sort of peppering in that data in until we have a very metadata rich, sort of transparent facies map of these really interesting times on, specifically to the Rocky Mountain region. And then eventually we're going to hand that off to a sort of paleo illustrator who's going to render that in sort of, Google Maps quality, Google Earth quality. And that's sort of the vision for, is that it could end up as, in coffee table books and in our open spaces and parklands, very centralized on the Rocky Mountain region, and in a way that's also more impactful to the geoscience community too, because they can then edit those maps and actually know where that data is coming from. So if they, someone does 5 years down the line, does a master's thesis on, say, I don't know, the fountain formation, and has some changes they'd like to make, we know exactly how, they would know exactly how to update that data, instead of it being sort of this opaque process. And so in terms of that outreach effort to the, community at a whole, that's very much an ongoing effort by myself and others. But sort of on a smaller scale, I love doing outreach to, like, last semester I was doing part of this program that was basically just inviting 7th and 8th graders on campus and giving them tour, showing them basically a day in the life of a geoscientist, and they recorded a video for that and had this big film series, and it was a lot of fun. And so I think, it doesn't all need to be, it can be part play too, because the field of geosciences is so in many ways approachable. I think even just looking at rocks and saying, oh, that used to be a beach, right? And think about where we are. We're in Colorado. How did a beach get to Colorado? That's sort of the logic follows what you're actually seeing. And I think that because it has a unique opportunity to connect with younger audiences because of that ability. And it's hard to explain chemical constants and laws of physics because some people can see them. People who are some
Not me.
some chemistry professors I've had, I swear, could like see the sublimation point of water and understand all that as I see geology. But I think it's a little easier to translate when you can actually be doing it on a hike.
Yeah, it's really cool. So, and then back to the PALEOMAP, the Rocky Mountain PALEOMAP project. I mean, it sounds like you're combining some very complex maps that geoscientists would use, and then doing maps for the public who may be lay people to the science of geology. How do you strike a balance in there? Is that still ongoing to figure that out, or what? That seems like it
Yeah,
could be a fine line between too much and too little information.
it is, and I think that has always been an issue with any form of science communication. Is at what point does it become detached from the realities of the science? At which point have you made too many assumptions? And we like to call these maps, in some respects, they're paleo fantasy maps, because when you actually see the data we do have, and I think that's what's so striking about these maps, is they're the first ones to include, on a large scale, to include the actual outcrop and metadata maps to like on the scale of individual publications. And for some time periods, you see there are 4 locations in the entirety of Colorado and Wyoming where we have data for this time period, and yet we have to still draw a map through inference. And so I think in that case, it can be really helpful to the community to have that base map, because they can see, okay, well, you're actually making a lot of assumptions of what's happening in eastern Colorado because there isn't any data for the next 100 million years, right? And yet, through inference, through whether it's detrital zircons telling us what directions rivers were flowing, well, then we will draw rivers flowing that way. Whether it's through, the fact we have missing rocks, that implies exhumation and uplift. So in some cases, the lack of information can be information itself, and can at least provide guidelines of how to draw these larger scale maps for the public that are still sort of acceptable to many geoscientists.
Interesting. Yeah, well, I'm really excited. So when do you think that, it sounds like it'll be a kind of a longer process, but where are they in the process, and when do you think those products will start coming out?
Well, I'm glad you asked. We have actually already sent out about a dozen, a little more now, like 20 maps out for review. And like I said, we're choosing sort of reviewers based on who's actually spent, large portions of their careers devoted to those time periods, because we're just sort of the armchair experts. We're just the collaborators. We can't be experts on every single time slice. And so our goal is to basically choose, however many reviewers are willing to help us, literally put pen to paper and draw, okay, actually, we know this wasn't, you drew it as a drainage network. It was actually a, aggradational system, and so on. And any amount of feedback we get is going to help refine that process. And so where we are now is we've sent out the sort of Jurassic through early Cretaceous, working on the late Cretaceous. That's very nearly done time series. So sort of that, 150 to 60, 70 million year time slice, and pushing out from the boundaries of there. And we've already gotten the first round of review back on many of those, and it's been really helpful. And we're just basically tweaking them as we go. And the goal essentially is to get that second round out, get, okay, it looks good. There's nothing like jarringly wrong. Of course, especially in the Cretaceous, things change on 100,000 year timescales, and we need to just figure out whether representative time slice within sometimes 5 or 10 million years is like good enough, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's something to showcase, like I said, in one of those parklands, and it's going to take a lot of time for an illustrator to make. And so we don't want that, 100,000 year time slices, although we could make them, and many people actually already have. That's, the scope of our project is much larger, so can't get lost in the weeds. But yeah, to answer your question, we're making progress, and slowly and steadily, and hopefully, at least personally, I'm hoping it can turn into something that is sort of a larger effort that can become something like a postdoc, or definitely it's incorporating itself into all the projects I do, right? So I'm studying the Wall Creek Turner system, and I'm going to build a, selfishly build a PALEOMAP of that time period for my own research. But, and I hope it becomes things like that where researchers start coming to us and saying, well, I've never seen this member of the Cedar Mountain Formation very, very well represented, or like, okay, there's a big gap in our knowledge of the early Permian, but we actually have a lot of new data on that. Can you draw us a map for a conference coming up? I think that would be sort of set up an institute where people can come to us would be a pretty huge goal of this project. And right now there's a gap in the future of creation of these maps. Folks like Ron Blakey and Chris Gotees are sort of the giants on whose shoulders we stand. But in terms of the next generation that will work on these, I'm hoping it could be us, or at least we could help those that want to do that.
Yeah, and it sounds like it'll be kind of a conversation and collaboration starter almost, right? So I mean,
right.
I always say maps are never done, and so it sounds like it'll
exactly
kind of continue that trend.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. Yeah. Good. So we might have covered this a little bit, but what continues to fascinate you in geology? And I would imagine, I did not do a PhD, but I could imagine there are probably some days where you question whether you want to continue in geology, but undertaking something as monumental as a PhD. But what continues to fascinate you about geology and keeps you coming back to your studies?
Yeah, so I mean, I think what you're getting at, the thing that really centers me, when I am having those doubts or when the workload is huge, like what I actually use to bring myself back to the larger scale awareness is really the windows into deep time that I am building. I have the opportunity with this project to get a glimpse into the deep past, right? 90 million years back, that has never been created before. And I think that larger scale perspective can get lost sometimes when you're dealing with 40-page Excel spreadsheets and porosity permeability data and subpar outcrops. But when you start putting it all together, what I'm getting is a picture of an environment rather than disparate pieces. And that to me, that larger perspective of whether I've found it or not yet, but the direction that I'm always building towards is that larger scale paleogeographic evolution that which ultimately governs not just interest wise being able to put it on a map, but also the distribution of those environments ultimately govern the distribution of energy resources in the resultant basin. Right. And so that's the piece of it that that really blends the academic with the professional and the engineering, is like these maps matter not just as a curiosity, but because those shorelines become reservoirs and those those seaways become source rocks. And so from both perspectives, it's incredibly valuable to the society we built today. And when you think about it being that far into deep time and having those little insights, I think that's sort of what grounds me, is that larger scale perspective of those sort of windows, building those windows into deep time.
Yeah, it's powerful maps, and yeah, you need a lot of responsibility, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, for the most part, like my PhD isn't like about maps. It's just that's sort of what grounds me, is the larger scale evolution. Yeah. My chapters are incredibly specific. One relates only to the facies, the actual sedimentary properties. The other one is all about the distribution of porosity and permeability. The other one is a geochronology and geochemistry piece. So like all that starts to get very much kind of in the weeds of the science itself, but that's required to, those weeds are required to grow the picture of that changing system. And, I maybe unwisely chose a time in the Cretaceous when there's a lot of really difficult factors occurring that are sort of muddying the waters there. So there's a sort of these tectonic uplifts occurring that are driving sedimentation. There's a lot of overprinting. It's bound by these big unconformities of varying ages, this formation I'm studying, the Wall Creek and the Turner. So it's it has every piece of like a challenge. It's like there's a lot of pieces missing there. And so any amount I can, I said I don't like puzzles. I guess I love them, but any amount I can piece together is going to be valuable information. But we have a lot less of it than, for example, sort of the later or earlier Cretaceous than the sort of middle and upper. This is a time sort of defined by what's missing, like I mentioned earlier.
Hmm, interesting. Any career mentors or academic mentors that
Sure.
you want to give shout outs to along the way?
Yeah, I mean, I already mentioned a few names, but the first geology professor I had, Raymond Rogers, that's the taphonomist sedimentary geologist. I spent 3 summers out in the field with him, and as his research student, he was the first person to show me the importance and interest of primary research, and was incredibly trusting of me in letting me basically have a project of my own. I had the um, sort of a level of trust that most advisors give to master's and PhD students, because I was at a undergraduate liberal arts college. It didn't have grad students.
Hmm.
Um, it really felt like it was setting me up for success in the academic world. So I'm incredibly thankful for that. But later on, I mentioned the Museum of Nature and Science. I've been working closely with James Hagedorn, the curator of geology there. I think you've had him on as a speaker before, just last year. And he, has and continues to be sort of a really amazing mentor for me, both in this paleogeographic maps project, but also, outside of academia with just life guidance.
Yeah.
He was the one who asked me, like, you seem to really like this internship, and these internships we're giving you, we can't do it forever. Do you want to go to grad school? And I was like, huh, maybe I should do that. Um, and and he was on my master's committee. He's on my PhD committee now, so it's that level of guidance and support is even continued to this day. And then I mentioned I studied fossil turtles. Walter Joyce was in Switzerland. I worked with him for a semester, authoring a manuscript on Platykelly's Oberndorferi, and riding around Switzerland on trains with the only specimen of these turtles that exist in briefcase. Like I was, like smuggling millions of dollars in these brief. Like I didn't have the handcuff, but it felt like I should have. And then of course my current advisor, academic advisor, Steve Sonnenberg, who both financial and academic support throughout my entire time here at Mines. And he's really allowed me to thrive here and to ask my own research questions, and has just been so supportive, and I'm really thankful. So that's, there's a lot of names that I didn't name. I could probably go all day, but my my work is not, doesn't exist in a bubble. It exists because of others, and I'm just yeah, I just hope that someday people will say, oh, that map that Patrick made was really helpful in my master's project, or whatever. That's how it's a form of storytelling, essentially. You just keep
Yeah.
on moving the tradition forward. And so
Yeah, and I really love hearing people's responses to that question because it means like you mentioned with James Hagedorn, like sometimes all it takes is somebody to ask you a question to get you on a new path. And I think that's really
right.
cool because, it'll be on us at some point to be the mentors and not the mentees. And that's good. I think it's good to kind of share some of those experiences. So definitely appreciate that. Um, what do you do for fun outside of geology? What keeps you entertained?
Oh, so many things. The Colorado classics: hiking, skiing, trail running, camping, all the things that are just incredible about here. But I also really enjoy sort of collaborative storytelling in the form of Dungeons and Dragons. I play every weekend. It's a huge part of what I do. My campaign notes are longer than my master's thesis. Don't tell my advisor. But essentially, it's just another form of. I just love being creative in that regard, and sort of building these new worlds and sharing them with my friends. So yeah, and then board gaming and video games too. But you
Cool.
know, there's always something to do.
Very good. And then for your upcoming talk on September 27th, who should attend? What can you give us some spoilers that maybe we haven't talked about already?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think who should attend? Quick plug for the talk. Everyone can attend. I'm gonna make it, I don't even like to say dumbed down. It's just gonna be a talk about an amazing time in Earth's history when, we were occasionally flooded by this etheric seaway, this continental seaway, and the Skull Creek, the formation I'm going to be talking about, is the first time sort of it poked its way into Colorado, the first time the seaway, the shores approached sort of Denver, as it were. And despite it being that really interesting time in Earth's history, the amount of publications on it, I think we're about 3 or 4 specifically devoted to that formation, and we've gotten so many new geochemical and these tools to be able to look into deep time. And so I'm going to be giving that aspect. That's going to be really the focus, is how to use these modern tools, right? Geochemistry, core descriptions, mudstone sedimentology, and taking that to a larger perspective of what does it tell us about the evolution of this first seaway, this first ancient Cretaceous seaway in Colorado. And so I'll make sure to have plenty of nice pictures and maps. And so whether you're a technical geologist or you don't really know anything about mudstones or sedimentology, I think everyone will have a great time. And if not, they'll have great food.
Well, that's great, and definitely looking forward to it. And thanks for all the information and chatting with us today. So remember,
Sure
September 27th, it'll be our first in-person / hybrid meeting since 2020. It's at the Rock Bottom downtown in Denver. You can find out more information on rmssepm.org. You can sign up there, register, and you can attend both virtually and in person. So we're trying to make sure that we can kind of continue to capture the wider audience in the Rocky Mountains as we have throughout our whole our virtual meetings and webinars. So again, thanks, Patrick. Thanks for everything here and for chatting with us today. And we really look forward to seeing. We look forward to seeing you on the 27th.
All right, I'll see you all there. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye. Bye.